In Book 4, we get a chance to get close into the character of Dido. We learn about her in detail. We see a rich psychological portrait of her, her interaction with Aeneas, her interaction with her sister Anna. The complexity of Dido's character makes her quite a strong figure. In fact, I think she's probably the most complex character of these opening books, more so than even Aeneas. She is sympathetic. We get to know a lot about her. We've seen her already being a pretty good person. She welcomes in Aeneas and his men. She shows them hospitality in the way that we know from the ancient Mediterranean is a good thing to do. She's building a city, something Aeneas can admire. She seems to be doing everything right. In Book 1, we show, through no fault of her own, the goddess Venus kind of sneaks up on her and gets her to fall in love with Aeneas through the intervention of Amor, her son. So she's sort of portrayed in that sense as not fully in control, but we can understand how she is overcome by divine intervention. But she is someone whose tale is not going to lead to happiness and friendliness. In fact, quite the opposite. This sympathetic character, Virgil, spends a lot of time watching get ground up by the machinery that's leading toward the founding of Rome. We were talking last time about how all these teleological currents are wedded to ideas that are pushing backward along the way. It's not a simple movement to the future. There's great suffering to be paid on the way. And Dido gives us a way of focusing in on one specific scene of this. Book 4 is the richest portrayal of what she goes through. It starts off as we see a hunt happen. Aeneas and Dido and their parties head out for a hunt into the wilderness, and lo and behold, wouldn't you know it, a storm breaks, and Aeneas and Dido find themselves taking shelter in the cave. The two of them there have an interlude that Virgil describes in really interesting language. Let's have a look at what the passage is. Now to the selfsame cave came Dido and the captain of the Trojans. Primal Earth herself and nuptial Juno opened the ritual. Torches of lightning blazed, high heaven became witness to the marriage, and nymphs cried out wild hymns from a mountaintop. That day was the first cause of death and first of sorrow. Dido had no further qualms as to impressions given and set abroad, and thought no longer of a secret love, but called it marriage. Thus, under that name, she hid her fault. Now, what's Virgil given us in this passage? Notice what we have. We have, to the selfsame cave came Dido and the captain of the Trojans. Primal Earth herself and nuptial Juno opened the ritual. To invoke Earth and Juno here is to invoke the two goddesses that have a great deal to do with marriage ceremonies. So we're talking about a specific kind of marriage that's being, the episode here is being cast as an actual bona fide marriage, with the two of them keeping an eye out for it. Virgil calls it a ritual. We've got torches of lightning blazing. Marriage ceremonies are marked by torches. To talk about torches is already to invoke a very strongly ritual context of marriage. And we've got lightning flashing around the cave that's taking the role of these torches. High heaven became witness to the marriage. There's Virgil telling us that what's happening in the cave is an actual marriage. The nymphs cry out wild hymns from a mountaintop. Well, that's also supposed to go on during a marriage. We've got nymphs moving around and wild songs that get sung. Then Virgil takes a turn. Look what happens in his description of the event. That day was the first cause of death and first of sorrow. Dido had no further qualms as to impressions given and set abroad. She thought no longer of a secret love, but called it marriage. Thus, under that name, she hid her fault. The first half of the passage seems pretty clearly that Virgil is telling us, yeah, there was a marriage that happened in that cave. The second half of the passage is Virgil telling us, no, it wasn't a marriage. Now, which Virgil do we believe? It's actually quite hard to decide. Did what happened in the cave count as a marriage, or did it not? Now, Roman legal precedents on such matters are not totally clear. It's not absolutely transparent what was supposed to have happened there. In fact, it's quite murky what happened there. Does Aeneas owe some affiliation and allegiance now to Dido? Well, it's tough to say. Dido surely thinks he does, and he, in the end, thinks that he doesn't. Aeneas comes right along, or Mercury comes right along and says to Aeneas, "You've got to go, run away, time for you to get out of here." Aeneas is ready to sneak away, shows up on pages 105 and 106, and when he's caught, he seems almost a little bit guilty. Line 490 to 500 in the Fitzgerald translation, when he's caught, he just quickly blames fate. It's not, I don't want to leave, but I have to leave. It's this destiny that's pulling me forward. There's nothing I can do to escape it. Dido will have none of this. She is absolutely over the top, angry with Aeneas, and the murkiness around the presentation of the episode, such as Virgil includes, makes the clarity of her anger, I think, in the story even more kind of admirable. We see, the one person here that seems to know what happened. It's not Aeneas. It doesn't really seem to be Virgil. The one person that seems to know what happened is Dido, and the strength of her reaction is really something to be taken away. We see this wonderful mural behind me from a frieze from mural from Pompeii that depicts stages in the life of women. Wonderfully rich setting for us to have our conversation. Dido and Aeneas having their marriage, it's not exactly clear what's supposed to have happened there. When Aeneas is caught, he gives this quick saying, "So please, no more of these appeals that set us both afire. I sail for Italy, not of my own free will." Aeneas is going to have to move forward because destiny is pulling him there. Speaking of as the story unfolds between Anna and Dido and the nastiness that they start to feel toward Aeneas, page 113 we have a suggestion of a magical rite of burning Aeneas's stuff, things that come from Aeneas. Love magic is a very common thing in antiquity, and this would have been understood through that lens. Magic was not something you would have been proud of doing. It was something you would have done if you felt in desperate need for it, and that Dido is reaching to this direction seems understandable. Page 114, we start to call on the underworld divinities, Erebos, Chaos, the Chasm, Hecate, Diana. These are gods and goddesses that you reach out to when you really need help. Remember, these are these chthonic divinities from the older order of things that are also associated with magic that Dido is appealing to. Again, quite an understandable state that she finds herself in great distress. Now, when I read this scene of Dido, I always have different feelings toward it from year to year. It's as though when I'm reading Homer, I can feel like, okay, I put one extra brick in the edifice of my knowledge of Homer each time I read it. I learn a little something here and I learn a little something there, and I kind of build a wall up of knowledge as time goes by. When I read Virgil, I feel like reading these important scenes, every time I read it, the whole wall moves. And I think this case of Dido is one of those especially rich ones where it's really hard to make a final statement on how we're supposed to read this episode of Dido. Let me just give you a couple of examples of different strong feelings I've had, strong interpretations I've had of this scene, and none of these do I think is the absolute be-all and end-all. Let me just present several different readings. First of all, the sympathetic one, the one I've been presenting pretty much so far, we're really brought through her version of events here. We feel sorry for her, I think. This makes her tale an instance of these back currents that Virgil spends time on. So rather than just focusing on the destiny that's leading us forward, we see all the suffering that has to be made to make things happen in a good way. It makes us, I think, quite sympathetic with Dido and feel her pain in a way and watch the awfulness that comes her direction get paid out in things that she doesn't quite seem to deserve. But then part of me wants to jump in and say, wait a minute, there are a couple of other possible readings we can do here. How about, for example, a functionalist reading? What if we examined here what kind of social values are being underwritten, are being legitimized by the telling of the tale? Well, we've got a pretty clear example here of the overriding virtue of pietas being made to be shown triumphant in this situation. Even if Aeneas would have wanted to stay with Dido, he couldn't. Pietas, his duty, requires that he go forward, and even though it's at great cost, this pietas is the central anchoring virtue of this culture, and therefore it must be fulfilled. So functionalism, a functionalist reading here would underscore that the value being legitimized is pietas, irrespective of the cost. We still have to do it. Furthermore, and in support of this reading, remember at the very beginning, Dido shows herself as someone who is very clearly exhibiting a traditional virtue of xenia. She's welcoming Aeneas and his crew, giving them a home, offering to marry him. You can marry our queen, well, marry me. You can have a kingdom. All these things are being exhibited through Dido's reactions toward Aeneas. Well, what Aeneas does in the end is say, sure, xenia is all well and good, and that might have made sense in a Homeric time, but it's pietas now that's the central virtue, and we have to anchor that. So in this functionalist duel, pietas wins out over xenia. I think a really interesting way of looking at how this thing might be working here. Another way of thinking about this puts it in a richer historical context, understanding what's happening during Virgil's own time. Aeneas here shows a master Roman dominating a lovelorn Carthage, who wishes to be with Rome, but eventually is destroyed by Rome. This would map onto a history of the Carthaginian Wars that the Romans would have known well. Carthage was, of all the cities in the Mediterranean, the one that most powerfully stood between them and total domination of the Mediterranean. The Carthaginians, in real historical periods that the Romans knew well, for over 100 years did awful battle and war with the Romans. In fact, the Romans remembered the Carthaginian conflict and their ultimate victory there as the great exhibition of Roman power and Roman strength. It showed pietas, duty, fulfillment of your duty, to the greatest degree possible. It was the great exhibition of Romanness as they conquered the Carthaginians, no matter how awful the suffering was. They won out over the Carthaginians. Now, with that historical background of the Carthaginian, the Punic Wars, let's go back and have a look at what's happening here. Now we have Carthage, who's feminized. We've got a hyper-masculine Rome, who wins out over Carthage. Carthage wants nothing more than just to be loved by Rome, but instead Rome destroys her. So, as a contemporary Roman, I think there's a kind of rah-rah element to this, as you see the Carthaginians once again get crushed. Looking at another historical component here, let's walk this back just a little bit and tie it in with something that a piece of contemporary history that Virgil would have known very well. Our hero, Aeneas, shuns the clutches of a North African sex goddess, thereby besting Odysseus, right? He does not fall for the wiles of that we see Odysseus falling for with these various kinds of exciting women on strange faraway places. He gets away. He also escapes faults that would have been on the front of the minds of Romans during Virgil's time. What happened in Egypt when a great general named Antony fell in love with a North African sex goddess of Cleopatra. Well, my goodness, awful things happened, and it ripped all of Rome apart. So if we're trying to imagine a sympathetic reading of Dido, we'd have to run that past what is clearly, obviously, going to be a very unsympathetic reading of a figure like Cleopatra coursing around in the contemporary historical accounts. So, of course, Aeneas leaves behind Dido. He can't fall victim. No matter how sincere his love is or her love is, he can't fall victim to that. If he did, he would be no better than the people that had caused such awful civil war in recent history in Roman memory. So all of these things, I think, are layers that are built into this story. As I say, I'm not sure which one I would endorse in the end. Virgil, I don't think, does that for us. He's not trying to tell some simple tale that has tidy lessons to be drawn. Instead, he's always presenting very complex tales. Now, I don't want that to be an invitation for all of us to say, oh yeah, whatever interpretation of Virgil you want to give is okay, que sera, sera, I'm okay, your interpretation's fine, yours is fine too. Let's not do that. Instead, let's say, in order to understand all the complexities, the different shades of gray in Virgil's text, we have to double our efforts to read it very closely and work very hard and have intense conversations back and forth about what's happening. I'm really interested to see what you all are going to make of this story in the further discussion that we have. I think there's a tremendous amount still to be talked about. I've only just barely scratched the surface.